different. The idea that it's a certain style of where it's humorous jokes, but underlying it, there's a tiny bit of harshness. The idea. Now I'm on YouTube forever and ever. Oh, anybody wants this? I think it's very, very useful. The art school, yeah, it's good to have it straight away. Yes, that's what I was thinking. One of them's got a few of my scribbles on. Oh, it's not that one. Yeah, pass a few rounds. Yeah, pass. Yeah, take.
One video.
Once will do. I've had one. I'm trying. You still have to wear your mask. You need to wear your mask.
Can I have a few more seats?
First time you're back there, you
What? Are you okay, Shai?
I'm fine, but
If you mind, tell you pass. Okay, later. I want the English. I want them back. The words can taste other people.
No, go there.
where's Khan is the one?
There's three seats. We don't need to. There's no social distancing.
Yes, right, go. Okay. Welcome to all new and old participants. New, old. Are you old, David? Because young. Old. Ian, nice to see you. Yeah, I see you all the time. Yes. As well. Okay. A very big mazel tov to be starting a new Masechta. That we should get clarity and learn it. To finish it. Shivas Yomim Kedim Akipurim, 7 days before Yom Kippur, Mafishin Kohen Gadol Beis. So we take the Kohen Gadol out of his home, the Lishkas Bahedrin, to a special chamber called the Chamber of the Bahedrin. So Bamga, he always starts and then he says the introductions. That's all the Raja was saying. Introduction to Yoma, short things. The word Yoma, what's the word Yoma mean? It means the day. After million of dollars, if you ever talk to anybody, you say D-Day, what do they say? It was June the 6th, about 1944, I think. 6th of June. Because everybody knows that was the greatest day in military history. When we talk about the day, we talk about the day of Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the highlight of the year. I saw brought down that on Yom Kippur, the Satan can't be Mekatrig. If you take the Gematria of Has-Satan, it's 364. On Yom Kippur, normally it's 365 days in the year. The Satan only has power on 364 days of the year. On Yom Kippur, he has no power. He's locked up. If a person learns Yoma, so the Shalom Promise was saying, while he's learning Yoma, the Satan can't be Mekatrik. He's safe from all kinds of kittuk of the Satan. It's unbelievable spirit to learn Yoma. We should take our time. Very good.
We should definitely do the extra few days.
That's right.
It's only for the hour you learn, right?
No. While you're busy learning Yoma, your Satan can't get in. That's what I think. That's what you're going to be thinking about. So now, that's one point. There's a word that comes to learn Yoma the day of Yom Kippur. On the slightly less happy note, I once said this years ago, it made a very big impression on me, is that if you think about it, what is the most important day of the year? Yom Kippur. Now, Yoma has 8 Masechtas. 8 Parokim. How many Parokim do we deal with nowadays? Only the last. That means all the halachas of fasting, mechila, tshuva is all in the last parak. The other 7 Parokim deal with Avodah Beis Hamikdash. That means we only have 1/8 of the real day of Yom Kippur. And that's a very good thing to realize how much we have to daven for Mashiach, because really we're only 1/8 of the day. Can you imagine when Mashiach will come, our whole Yom Kippur will be 8 times bigger. It gives a certain idea of it. But before Shmuel asked the question, why does Yoma? What? No, we won't spend all day in Shul. No, we'll be all in the Beis Hamikdash. You have to remember, we say in the Stichas Emes Ma'aned, we say in the davening Emes Ma'aned Ma'al Kohen, that the beauty and the glory of the Yom Kippur It wasn't a day where everybody walked around upset. It was a day when everybody walked with a tremendous, tremendous joy. It was unbelievable, the simcha that existed, the Yom Tov that existed. So if you, before Shema ask, why is Yoma the first Masechta after Shkolim? What's the order? Why is the order Yoma first? So the Rambam writes, because in the Torah, Yom Kippur is mentioned first. If you're very cold, I mean, Tzaddik includes, I don't know, I can keep it into maybe, yes, keep it, maybe leave it to a fraction open, but I don't know, it's up to you. So the Rambam writes that in Achveimus, next week's Parsha, we're going to be learning about Yom Kippur. Where did the other Yom Tovim come in? Which Parsha really took Emor. He says Emor. Okay, so the Maisa says, since Yom Kippur comes first, in the Torah, we mention Yom Kippur first. Other Meforshim say, this is the that Yom Kippur is very close to the Kedusha of Shabbos. You saw this?
No, because he was sure.
I thought you said Shabbos. That you can sit in front of me. Yes, you can sit right over on. No. Sure. You have to sit here. Come, sit here, please. You're doing it. Come. A kohen, you need to know that halacha is even better than everybody else. You can't hide behind the wall. You need to know what to do. Yeah, we're very kohen orientated. So the point, what? So again, see, so the Miri says because Yoma is very close to Kedusha of Shabbos, and therefore since it's called the Kedusha of Shabbos, therefore it makes sense that we should put Yoma next to Yom Kippur, next to Shabbos. Why we put Shkolim in between? Because Shkolim includes all the Yom Tovim, because it's for the Kabbalah for the Yom Tovim. But then we do Yoma. It's interesting. The Shulchan Aruch, the Torah, didn't do Yoma first. He did Pesach first because he goes according to the order of the year. And the Rambam goes in his order as well, but not the Rambam came first. But Maisa in the Seder of Gemara, we do Yoma first. Right. I just say, I've got to the Sefer the horse for Nash, very beautiful. It just says a very interesting thing. Let's get the Mishnah clear first. The Mishnah says 7 days before Yom Kippur, we tell the Kohen Gadol move out of your house and move into the Beis Hamikdash. And he would eat there, sleep there. He would move in without his wife. The Gemara later will explain why his wife was not allowed to come in with him. He had to be without his wife the whole 7 days. Question, what would happen if he missed the 7 days? Was that ma'akav? The Shonim all say no. It's a lechatchila, it's not b'diavad, it's okay if he doesn't go out 7 days before. Another halach is like this. This is Vas Emes Mechadash, a very beautiful point. What happens if he misses 1 day? Is there any point of being away for 6 days? He says a very complicated answer, but he says an interesting thing.
Is 7 days not to make sure he doesn't become tummy?
Very good. So what happens if he's 6? What happens if he missed the first day? Should he go for 6 days?
He could have been tummy on the first
No, but Tumah is Tumas. More discusses which Tumah is like. But he's not tummy. Okay.
Assuming he's not tummy, then yeah.
He's not tummy. It's bit like, he says like this. Fasema says a very interesting halacha. He says, Shiva is Lashon Zacham. Shivas is Lashon Nekeva. Yomim is Lashon Zacham. Shivas Yomim is a contradiction in terms. Shivas is Lashon Nekeva. Yomim is Zacham. He says, because Rashi al-Torah says in a few places that Shivas doesn't mean 7. It's like a dozen or score where the word is a special number to denote an entirety of a week. Like you don't say a week and 7 are two slightly different words. 7 days in a week is like a number which includes Shivas means a 7-day period. And from here he learns that if you miss 1 day,
2012.
That's right, difference between 2012, exactly. And therefore Shivas, he says, means 7 days. So if you miss 1 day, you've lost it, no point doing it at all.
It's in numbers, it's the same. It doesn't is like a unit.
Right, that's right, exactly. So that's what he says. Shivas is a unit if you miss 1 day. So again, Shivas is go to base Lishkas Bahedron. Now, where was the Lishkas Bahedron? So I don't know if you've got the old school, you've got this picture. It's by this particular one, it's Chof Ches. Chof Ches, if you look very carefully.
No, I've got a fake one.
It is. Yeah, it says between, if you look, between Lishkas Agol and Lishkas Agozis, it is in the north side of the Beis Hamikdash, about halfway along. We actually got big avichos as to how could he sleep there. It's inside the Azor, and with halacha he's not allowed to sleep inside the Azor.
I saw they say it was on Beis. It was a separate building on Beis.
But if you look at the diagram, it's not like that. But the
Does it say in the mission that he slept in the base?
It says he slept in Lishkas Bahedron, yes. It's between Lishkas Agol and Lishkas Agozis. Okay, we'll come to it more later. we provide another kohen in case something goes wrong with this kohen. The halacha is that the avodah in Yom Kippur has to be done with a kohen gadol. That is ma'akev. Somebody who's not a kohen gadol can't do it, and he might become tummy. The Meforshim will point out that we know that one of the son Nisan that happened to be Sabikdash was what? He never became tummy. So why do you need another kohen? So provide another kohen. The Tosfos Yom Tov says, what does it mean by skinim lekohen achad? Did that other kohen also have to move out for 7 days in case the other kohen became possible? No, because we just said that, but the evidence doesn't matter if it's not out for 7 days. So what we did was very, very interesting. Tosfos Yom Tov says this, and I saw brought down many places this idea. There was, what did they do for the second kohen? What did he have to do? What would he do? What do you mean prepare? How can you prepare kohen gadol? Say to him, no, because we just said that it's makar, it's not makar b'diavad. What we do is like this. The halacha is the clothes of a kohen gadol have to fit exact. If they're too big, too small, mid or bad, it's no good. Now the clothes of the Yom Kippur were slightly different because the only time of the year he wore them, the fall. So we prepared him another set of clothes to fit the second kohen. They should fit him. That's what we did. We checked him out. We measured him and fitted him in. They should be good. Rabbi Yehuda provide him a second wife. So you have to prepare for the wife, and therefore, if the wife, he has to be mechaper for his wife, and if his wife dies, we know good. So prepare for him a second wife. There'll be no end. If you're chayshish from Misa, there'll be no end to it. Before I should describe what's the difference between Misa and Tumah, the Gemara discusses. We'll come to it much later. But the Misa, this is also a shine in the poskim. What happens if a kohen gadol is not married? Can he still be a kohen gadol? The Rambam Paskas, yes, he can. That's the case. He holds that this is only a lechatchila dikatin that he should have a wife. But the Gabi, this lechatchila will also prepare him a second wife because he should be able to mechaper for himself, the full thing. And all the Shalom Beis counselors will tell you that the kohen gadol for Yom Kippur, what's one of the main things that we have to make sure is that it's not ma'akev, but we work very hard to make sure that he has a wife. A person may think to himself that the kohen gadol is the most kodesh-dika person in Klal Yisrael, go to the most kodesh-dika place on the most kodesh-dika day. So what we should think to himself better should be like what the Christians do. They have celibacy. No, it's not like that, because by the Torah, celibacy is not praised. It's not meshubach. Yeah, we don't pass like him. You're right. We don't pass like him to get him a second wife. But the fact is, we do want him to be married. Right. So the Mishnah tells us basically the halacha that a kohen gadol has to be separated for 7 days before Yom Kippur in order that he should be worthy to do the avodah. There's also a big question. Did the kohen gadol do all the avodah on Yom Kippur? This is a machlekes all the way going from all the way down Ramban Balamoy. And if you look in the piyutim which we say on Yom Kippur, on the Musaf davening, it's mashma that the kohen gadol does everything. And unfortunately, we'll say that's a mistake. He doesn't do everything. He does most of the avodah. But the avodah which is done every day, other kohenim can do as well. Okay, I'll come to it as well. Now, this halacha that the kohen gadol has to be separated for 7 days is not just by Yom Kippur, it's also by Por Adum. Now, the pasuk says, if you get this pasuk, because we're going to dash this pasuk again and again and again. By me, it's dalad, if you've got it. I don't know if you've all got it. The pasuk like this: Kasha also by Yoma, just like you did on this day, Hashem commanded that you should do to be mechaper on you. Anybody know where this pasuk was said? Who said it to who? I did very, very recently. No, very close. Moshe Rabbeinu told it to Aaron on the 8th day of the Miluim. Just like you did today, you have to do lasses techaper aleichem. You have to always regularly do. The question is, what did it mean you have to do all the time? So Rashi al Torah says straight away, lasos is Por Aduma, lechaper is Yom Kippur. And just like on the Shiva Simei Miluim, what happened? Aaron and his sons for 7 days prepared themselves to become Kohanim. Also for Yom Kippur and for Por Aduma, you have to spend 7 days preparing yourself to be very royal to do the avodah of Yom Kippur and Por Aduma. And this is the Mekor for our Mishnah. Well, the Gemara goes on for a very long time, not like Yerushalmi, where every second line is a whole completely new sugya. Here we're going to go on, not finishing even today. It's going to go on for tomorrow as well. And a very long time is who says the pasuk is talking about Yom Kippur and Por Aduma. Maybe the pasuk is talking about Yom Tov, maybe it's talking about any korban. The pasuk, let's get the pasuk very clear, and then if you've got the pasuk very clear, the rest of the Gemara will be very, very easy. We could really do 2 daf in half an hour. The Gemara says like this: Let's go to the plus again. Kasha it's also by Yom Hazeh, just like you did today. Have you got it? You haven't got it. Kasha also by Yom Hazeh, just like you did this day. Siva Hashem commanded. Las is to do. Lechape aleichem to atone for you. So that's two separate things. Las is lechape. What's it talking about? So the Gemara Maskana is going to say Las is Yom Kippur. Lechape is Las is for Aduma. Lechape is Yom Kippur. But we're going to go again and again and again trying to prove is it that and is it not. And meanwhile, we talk about the halachas of Yom Kippur and Paraduma when it exists. Says what's then also. I have another Mishnah. Shiva Hashem could do a sefer sapor 7 days before burning the Paraduma. When my fish and kohen, our sefer sapor would separate him. We base it from his house to a special chamber which was by the Beis Hamikdash, Tzvoino Mizracha, in the northeast. In this particular diagram, they didn't write it in. It is this particular chamber. If you look at it, it's the one which is Lishkas HaMitzvah, which is the corner over here, and it's the top right, top left corner. It is in English, it is northeast room, Lishkas HaMitzvah, and within that room, there were 4 chambers. In that room, the top left chamber was the room that the Kohen who did the Paraduma would spend a week before he would bring the Paraduma. By the time we finish, you're going to get a blank thing, and you're going to have to fill in all the names and the chambers of all the rooms. Oh, why these different rooms? More to that second. It's a good question. Why not the same room? No, this is this is not the Kohen Gadol, by the way, and this didn't happen the week before Yom Kippur. It could have happened once in 100 years or once in 2 years, depending when they ran out of the Paraduma. But whenever they want to prepare Paraduma, they would separate a Kohen, not the Kohen Gadol, right? Not the Kohen Gadol. So even if one of you becomes the Kohen Gadol, so does got a chance to do the Paraduma. And they would be the ones to spend a week in that room. So the Mishnah
was the guy who did the Paraduma not the one that was born on a stilts?
Yeah, but nice when Mashiach comes, we won't have anybody born on stilts. So therefore, we'll have on what's the word for it? What are they called? Arches. On arches, you mean? On arches, not stilts. On arches. But you're right. But now if there isn't anybody, so they'll have to use a Kohen which exists. And the kinds of Lishkas Beis 7, Nikras was called Lishkas Beis 7. But Nikras Shmo Lishkas Beis 7. Why was it called Lishkas Beis 7? She called Maaseo, everything in that room became Glolim. They used to use vessels that can't become Tommy. What can't become Tommy? Clay Glolim. Glolim is Keli made out of dung, the Clay Avon made out of stone, the Clay Adomo made out of earth. Rashi, and most of the children agree with him, others disagree. What's the difference between Kli Cheres and Clay Adomo? Does anybody know? Write this down in your fridge. What's the difference between Kli Cheres and Clay Adomo? Yeah, but what's the difference in material? What's the difference in material? You're right. Kli Cheres Mekabatuma, Clay Adomo is not Mekabatuma. Very good, 100% right. But what's the difference in material?
One's fired, one's not.
Oh, very good. One's baked and one's not baked.
Right,
No, one's not baked at all. You just take a piece of earth and you hollow out a keli without burning it, mud, and you use that for supper. Today you're going for supper. You tell your wife, no, it doesn't have to be dirty.
It dries out.
It dries out.
Smooth
Smooth it out.
No worse than
Yeah, I'd like to trade that with Kli Gloglin.
Yes, the clay glolim.
no worse than
Clay glolim, yes. Because we want to make sure it should become Tommy. My time. Why would they so makbid about Tumba? We actually mentioned this before. Since the Tvul is kosher b'apor, it's not mitamanoya k'nesef sapor. They'll make the kohen who would burn the pot Tommy. Umat b'linois and make him tova loitz b'libon shot stuki. To take away from the heart of the stuki and show you maybe more veshemesh they would say only that somebody waits for shemesh. The halacha is if somebody comes to Tommy, he has to wait for nacht. They held that the kohen who burned the paraduma had to wait for nacht before he did it, and we know they don't have to wait for nacht. So would be makbid on every kind of level of Torah, and on the day that he would actually burn the parah, would make him Tommy, not wait for nacht, and then he would do the paraduma. Since we went to one extreme, that we were mezalzot, so to speak, to make him Tomei, we had to go to the other extreme that he shouldn't become Tomei. Again, it's an unbelievable words from Rashi. He says he heard this when he was a very little child from a visiting Rav, he doesn't remember the name. Rav said like this, such a strange thing that we do. That Stukim got so many things wrong. And we don't spend all our lives trying to prove them wrong. For example, they held the Sfir always starts on the Sunday. And we don't make sure, we could have made sure the Sfir should never start on the Sunday. But in Ma'aseh, sometimes it does. So why over here? And he says there's a very important yesod. That Stukim were generally more maker. Generally, they're always more maker. This is the one exception whether they were more machmir. There were more machmir that you have to wait for Erev Shemesh. When it's Duki's machmir, the danger of being followed and swept by this false ideology was much greater. So when somebody comes along and comes up with a chumrah, with a wrong hashkafa, then you have to be even more careful. And if they wanted to show, no, this is wrong. He says it's very important in life. Sometimes it's hard, very easily. It's very easy to fight the Yitzhak. He tells you to do something wrong because you get it clear. Sometimes the Yitzhak comes in the guise of a chumrah, and then it's very, very hard to fight it. That's why it's special sukkah. So let's get it clear. Because they want to get rid of the libon shutzukim that they said that we should use somebody to their shemesh, therefore we have to be very careful to make Torah. So we moved them into a room where everything can't become tummy. By the way, I just want to point out that the Beis says clay kilolim does not mean dung, it means marble. He holds that marble doesn't become tummy. There are those who argue the Beis as to whether marble can become tummy or not. What? Marble's not the same as stone. Stone is one material, marble is a different material. Similar, okay. It's like, okay. One other thing is, there's a tesis over here. The third tesis, that tesis Rashi says that the day that he brought the Po'ah Adumah, they would take a dead shell, touch it to the Kohen, make him tummy, and then before that, he would. Tesis says it doesn't make sense after all the effort to make him toy, we should then go and do such a chomodik tumah like tumah shell. So what we do is, we do a very light tumah. That is, we touch him. And if you remember, we once said that all hands which you've not looked after got tumah d'Rabbanan, so we touch him. By touching him, he gets tumah d'Rabbanan, something like that. Or tumas mashkin, if you remember, that all liquid is tumah. That's when we did the karpas, we washed our hands because all liquid. But Rashi says it's a very, very light tumah. We didn't use a real tumah shell. It's not like Rashi. Okay. The Gemara carries on. Why northeast? Kim the chatosi, since it was a chatos, the chatos to the tzofin, and the chatos was do it in the north. When it says by the Po'ah Adumah, they would sprinkle the blood opposite the Moed. They would choose the northeast in order they should recognize why he's there and he shouldn't forget the whole time. This is very difficult Gemara to digest because there's two problems. First of all, the Po'ah Adumah was not shechted in the north. Where was the Po'ah Adumah shechted? Outside Beis Hamikdash was shechted on a nearby mountain, and you'd only look towards the Moed. But because in one place the Torah calls it a chatos, and a chatos is shechted in the north, so the room had to be in the north. And furthermore, it had to be northeast. Why east? Because it wave it to the east. Did he take a sprinkle to the east? No. He sprinkled to the west. Because this is one of the most confusing things about the Beis Hamikdash. There is west. Here is east. He stood for Erech where Moshe was standing. And then he would sprinkle it towards me, and I'm west. But the answer is he was sprinkling it towards the eastern wall of the Beis Hamikdash. So therefore he was sprinkling it west, but towards the eastern wall of the Beis Hamikdash. Tichak or not clear? If I'm west, actually, right, and Moshe is sprinkling towards me, and there'd be a wall over here, that wall would be the eastern wall. So he's sprinkling from outside, he's sprinkling to the eastern wall. So because of the fact that he was sprinkling to the east wall, and it's called a chatos, we put him in the room which is northeast to remind him the whole time when he's in the room, why is he there? And therefore you should be careful not to become tummy.
When we say the western wall,
yes,
it's this wall here.
Yes,
so
it's this wall.
We sort of stand behind the basement.
Very good. And actually, one big advantage where we're standing is we're actually very, very close to Kodesh. Because this is the only wall that we have left. By the way, this is completely not to size, not to scale. That's right, not to scale at all. Because maybe that's got the idea. I was hoping to have a projector. Okay, it doesn't matter. One day we'll get into it more. Anyway, right. Says the Gemara, my bira. Why is it called bira? There was a place in the Beis Hamikdash called Bira, and this room was next to it. The whole room, the whole Beis Hamikdash called Bira. This is about a few times. What is Bira? Shlokish says one small place. Rabbi says one small place. Shlokish says the whole place. So now we've got two Mishnahs. Our Mishnah tells us that Kohen Gadol separates 7 days, and a Mishnah in Pova that tells us that what? That the Kohen who burned the Po'ah Adumah separates 7 days. And that explains a little bit your reason. We're going to see why later the Gemara is going to explain why the Kohen Gadol goes to the Parhedron. But the Po'ah Adumah Kohen does go to the Parhedron because he has to remember northeast to remember what he's doing. So therefore, to remember, David, the question why it's a separate room, because it's a separate message in the room. Okay. How do we know this whole concept? Just like Hashem did, just like you did on this state. Hashem commanded Lasos lechape aleichem. Lasos elu ma'aseh po. Lechape elu ma'aseh ma'kipurim. So we've got the word Lasos is po aduma. Lechape is yom kippur. And now the Gemara is going to challenge it again and again and again and again. Says the Gemara, it's not likely that the whole pasuk is only talking about po aduma. Why? The chapiksiv, because the pasuk uses the word kapo. The po labas kapoi. Po did not actually machap on anything. The po aduma did not atone for any avera. The po aduma was just a way to become toy. So you can't say lechape. It didn't atone for anything. Let's say the pasuk is saying lasos lechape to do, to be mechaper for Yom Kippur. And how do you know bichlad that the pasuk is mentioning for aduma? Answers the Gemara. Tis asks the question, and one could have missed out the word lasos. Okay, we'll get to that. So Gemara says, "Omi yalef tzivo tzivo." We do exer shava. Tzivo tzivo Hashem lasos. Tzivo sabzo is chukas atayah. Asher tzivo Hashem nemo, which Hashem commanded, saying, "Ma lahalon po afkan po." That means like this. We do exer shava. The Torah says tzivo over here, tzivo by po aduma, to tell us that you have to separate for 7 days. Actually, remember. Umakan prisha af lahalon prisha, also there to separate. Top of Beis and Beis. Oh, very good. What? Aaron did like Hashem commanded. Answers go like this. Done in Sivo de Lifne Asir, mit Sivo de Lifne Asir, vein done in Sivo de Acha Asir, mit Sivo de Lifne Asir. If you look at the other two psukim, it says Sivo, and then afterwards it says Asir. For example, let's look at the pasuk. And then later it tells us what you should do. It says tzivu and then the commandment. Or this pasuk, tzivu Hashem, lasos. Hashem commanded to do. The tzivu comes first and the lasos comes later. But over here in this pasuk, it says vayas, Aaron did, and then later it says kasha tzivu. The asir comes before the tzivu. We don't do exer shava, which is not similar. For anything more, tzivu the karbonis. On the day that Hashem commanded Klal Yisrael, and therefore it would come out that every single kohen that ever brings a korban, what would he have to do? Separate for 7 days. Do you hear that? That's what Moses says. The Yoma, let us say that the tzir over here that every single kohen that ever brings a korban would have to be separated from his wife for 7 days. Answer, well, no, don't say that. Done in Siva mitzvah, done in Savoisoi mitzvah. We don't do exer shava unless it's similar. And here you've got Siva, that is similar. But there the pasuk says Savoisoi. Savoisoi and Siva have the same root, Siva, Sav. But it's not the same word. Savoisoi is command him, Siva is to command. Since it's not exactly the same word, we don't do exer shava. For the Gemara, my nafkimina, do we not do exer shava if it's not similar? But this Gemara comes up in many places in Shas. And many places in Shas. And normally I will not explain the Gemara so well, because I will just say that we do exer shava from shav and bo, even though the two words are very, very different. But because they're slightly similar, shav means to return, bo means to come. Coming and returning are similar words, so we do exer shava. And therefore we see they don't have to have exact words to do exer shava, which the Gemara therefore brings back to the question, let's do exer shava from Siva to Tzavoisoi. Why did you say you can't do exer shava from Siva to Tzavoisoi? It's not the same word. If you do exer shava from shav and bo, which is really not the same word, kavachomer you can do tzav and Tzavoisoi. But because this pasuk comes in this week's parsha, and Rashi spends a lot of effort explaining the exer shava in this week's parsha, I'll explain it very, very briefly. It's geschmack to know it. The pasuk of this week's parsha says that if the kohen comes and he finds, I read the words of the pasuk, that means the kohen came to the house, sold tzavas, he locked up the house. He came back a week later and he sees that the nega has spread twice the size, 3 times the size. The pasuk then continues, you should knock down the house. Says Rashi that even though the pasuk says that, that's not what the pasuk means. The pasuk does not mean you should knock down the house. What does the pasuk really mean? What should you do? Does anybody know? A couple of these long Rashis. What should you do? Get rid of the bricks. You do Rashi. Get rid of the bricks. What you do is just get rid of the bricks. You don't knock down the house. Those bricks. You don't get rid of the house. Says Rashi, how do I know? Because I do exer shava. Because it says the shava the kohen should return, uboah the kohen should come. And when the pasuk says the kohen comes, the pasuk says that when the Kohen comes and he sees tzaras, we tell the Kohen, when he comes back after a couple of weeks and sees it there, we remove the bricks. So just like the Torah there says it means remove the bricks, also over here means remove the bricks. So from this Gzeir Shava, what do we learn? You have to remember, from this Gzeir Shava, we learn that if a Kohen comes back and the nega has spread, we don't knock down the house, we just take out the bricks. But the main message of the Gemara is that we see you can make a Gzeir Shava even if it's not similar. So if that's the case, let's make a Gzeir Shava in Tzavoset, it's Siva. And if that's the case, every Kohen, every time he brings a korban, should have to separate for 7 days. Says, well, no, we don't do that. If we can't make a Gzeir Shava which is similar, so we have no choice, make a Gzeir Shava which is not similar. If there's something which is similar, but the domile alfinon, you have to do something similar. So we aim to get it as similar as possible. If we don't manage, we go for something not similar. It says, well, let's say lechaper is to atone any korban every time you get a korban before the Gemara kasha from Sivot Savoisik. I think more answer because you've got better Gzeir Shava Sivot to Paraduma. But here the Gemara's got a kasha lechaper to atone. Even though the main atonement is Yom Kippur, there's other atonements other days. Says the Gemara, no. We won't know which Kohen. How would each Kohen know? Every single Kohen in the world, what would he do? Never be with his wife, because he may be the Kohen that does it impossible. Says, well, why not? We've done this before, we talked about it, that there was Chof Daled Mishmos, 24 groups, and every group was split into 6 Beis Av. So each family which has their day would have to separate a week before. Says the Gemara, since by Shmini we're talking about something which is a fixed time, which Chodesh Nisan, also we hear Yom Kippur something which is a fixed time. La Fuki Korbanos the Chol Yoma Isnu that had to apply every day. We're not going to make a Gzeir Shava to something which happens without a time basis. Yom Kippur is a fixed time. Shmini was a fixed time. To come up with a time which is not fixed, that we don't do, and therefore we go back to the Pshat that it's talked about Yom Kippur. Maybe it's referring to one of them too. If the Pasuk is referring to one of Yom Tovim, we wouldn't know which Yom Tov it would be. And then again we'd have the question, what's the Pasuk talking about? Again, the Torah said by the Shminas Me'amiluim, just like you did to now Aaron and your sons, that you prepared yourself for 7 days, so shall you do lechaper lasis. We dash lechaper lasis lechaper, sorry. Lasis paraduma lechaper zim kippur. Then we'll ask, so how do you know? Maybe lechaper means korbanos is without being possible. Says the Gemara, no, you need to have something fixed time. Pray the Gemara, maybe it's to talk about Yom Tov. Well, which Yom Tov? Says, well, I'll tell you which Yom Tov. Maybe it's Chagamatzis or Pesach Tchila. All the Kohanim working on Pesach should have to separate for 7 days. Or maybe it's the Yom Tov of Sukkot because it's got a lot of mitzvahs. What do we mean over here, Mubah Mitzvah? Why, in what ways Mubah Mitzvah? Right. Many of the folks should explain Mubah Mitzvah has got a huge amount of kabbalas. We're going to go into this a bit later. But Shivim Polim every day, 14, 13, 12, etc. But
Meishanas on the base on the Mizbeach.
What?
Meishanas on the Mizbeach, no?
Also, that's right. There's another thing is that you have to do lulav, avova, nisachamayim, walking around the avova. So there's a lot of mitzvahs. Says no. Elodonim Prisha Shiva Echad. By Shiva Simei Miluim, they were separated for 7 days in order to work on the 8th day. So they separated 7 days for 1 day. That is similar to Yom Kippur, which you separate the Kohen Gadol for 7 days for 1 day of Yom Kippur. If you separate for Pesach and Sukkot, how many days are you going to separate? You're separating 7 days for 7 days. So that's not comparable. So therefore, we say it's more likely the Pasuk is talking about Yom Kippur than any other day. Again, Donim Prisha Shiva Yom Echad, Prisha Shiva Yom Echad. We're going to say the Pasuk is talking about Yom Kippur, where you separate 7 days for 1 day rather than 7 days for 7 days of Pesach and Sukkot. Let's say we're talking about Shmini Atzeres, because then you'd have to separate 7 days for 1 day. So what says the Prisha, the Shiva Yom Echad, because separating 7 days for 1 day. So we know. We compare Yom Kippur where there's no Kedusha before it to Shmini, although the Shmini Simei Miluim there was no Kedusha to it. Masha'enkin Shmini Atzeres, you have a whole week of Sukkot before. So if you've got a question, what to compare, the Shmini of the Shmini Simei Miluim, which the Torah says just like you did now, you shall do in other cases, Which other cases are most likely to be Yom Kippur? Because Yom Kippur's got no Kedusha before. Actually, Shmini Atzeres, you've got a whole week of Sukkot. Is it not a Kavachimu? Hash, therefore, already done in Kedusha lefanav something like Yom Kippur and Shmini Smamilum, where there was no days of Kedusha before it. Boy, Prisha, nevertheless, you have to separate 7 days. Dovashesh Kedusha lefanav lekol shekain is something which has got Kedusha like Sukkot. We should say if already for Yom Kippur and for the Shmini Smamilum. We told the Aaron HaKohen and the Kohen Gadol to be separate for 7 days. For the 1 day Avodah, Shmini Atzeres, which has got a whole week of Kedusha before, Kal V'chomer, we should be separate for 7 days. Omar Mishal Shir, Lo Hazeh Ksiv, the Torah says Hazeh Ksiv. Lo Hazeh Ksiv, Kozeh. The Torah says, like is. Let's just read the Pasuk. It's like this. Kasha also by Yom Hazeh, just like you did on this day. Hazeh, it has to be as similar as possible. And at the end of the day, Shmini Atzeres is not similar to Yom Kippur, it's not similar to Shmini Smamilum. Why? Because Shmini Atzeres is a day where you've got a whole week of Yom Tov before it. Shmini Smamilum is got, Shmini Atzeres got a whole week of Kedusha before. Shmini Smamilum didn't have a whole week of Kedusha. So the word Hazeh tells you it has to be similar. Says the Gemara, Sukkot, you're going to say you don't need to separate. Does anybody remember why we don't need to separate 7 days for Sukkot? Why we don't say you should separate for 7 days for Sukkot? What? No. Because we say you separate 7 for 1, not 7 for 7. So Sukkot is not going to separate. But for Shmini Atzeres, well, says actually that won't make any sense. The Iker Yom Tov is what? The 7 days of Sukkot. Shmini Atzeres is like an additional day. It won't make any sense to say that the Torah should tell you separate 7 days for Shmini Atzeres, but for Sukkot you don't. So we've got 2 answers as to why when the Torah says to separate, it doesn't mean Shmini Atzeres. The first answer says Hazeh, like this day. This day is a day which stands on its own without Kedusha before. Alternatively, if on Sukkot you don't separate, it won't make any sense that you should separate on Shmini Atzeres. Let's see the words of Rashi again. Rashi, Yoma, make a regular the main Yom Tov of Sukkot is to separate. Tofel today. But the one which is toffel to it, which is adjacent to it, boy prisha. Even if you say Shmini is not adjacent to Sukkot, it's a completely different Yom Tov. When I was very young, my father used to do this almost every year. I don't know why, I didn't remember from year to year. In the middle of Sukkot, he would say to the children when we were like 8 or 9, what does Pazer Kashav mean? Most years we would not remember it properly. So without looking inside, you'll all tell me what does Pazer Kashav mean. Oh, good. Okay, even now that you've looked, without looking again, tell me what Pazer Kashav means. It's a troubling thing. I don't know how to remember.
It's to do with the Purim, no?
No, it's to do like this. So the big machloikus is Shmini Atzeres a part of Sukkot or not? Is Shmini Atzeres a separate? I'll tell you another way to remember this, by the way. Your wives light candles. That only once a year they don't say Shechi on the when don't they say Shechi? Shvish Pesach. Shvish Pesach. Shmini Atzeres, they do. Why did they say Shechi Shmini Atzeres or not? It's a new Yom Tov. Oh, very good. This question, is Shmini Atzeres a new Yom Tov or not, is read like the simple way to remember it is Pazer Kashav. Pazer Kashav are 6 letters, which are Rosh Tevas for 6 ways that we see that Shmini Atzeres is a separate Yom Tov. If we see that Shmini Atzeres is a separate Yom Tov, then the question could in theory come back that Shmini Atzeres is a separate Yom Tov, so maybe we should separate 7 days for Shmini Atzeres. What did the Rashi answer? It doesn't make any sense to separate Shmini Atzeres if you're not separating for Sukkot. And Shmini Atzeres is only a, what's the word for Toffel? What's the good word for it in English? Toffel. Secondary. What did you say? Addition. Secondary or addition to Yom Tov. So therefore you could say like this. If Shmini Atzeres is secondary addition to Sukkot, then Taka, you shouldn't make sense that for Sukkot you don't separate because we don't do 7 for 7, and for Shmini Atzeres you would. But if you say that Shmini Atzeres is completely own Yom Tov, then the question comes back, and Rashi answers, let's do the words, Tashlumin division. At the end of the day, Shmini Atzeres is a Tashlumin of the division, that if you don't bring your korban on the 7 days of Sukkot, you still have the option to bring it to Shmini Atzeres. Every Yom Tov you've got a mitzvah to bring which korbanos? How many korbanos?
3.
3.
Chagiga and Riyah, only on Pesach 3.
No. All Yom Tov 3. Olas Riyah, Shabbos Simcha, Shabbos Chagiga. You're right.
fourth one.
Let's very briefly. Olas Ve'ir is a special korban. No, you don't go Beis for nothing. Shami Simchit, because there's a mitzvah to be happy in Yom Tov, so you have to get Simchit. Shami Chagiga is a special. I noticed today, at Isur Chag at Kanus and Mizbeach, it's a very, very difficult pasuk to translate. And the pasuk literally means that you tie your sheep to get it ready for the Chag of Mizbeach. Okay, the Maisa, that's the Chagiga, that's the Shami Chagiga. Right, so let's now go in for a minute or two about Pesach Shav. It's very hard to remember, and it's a very sadistic because the Rishonim discuss it. Here, look at Tesis. It's got a nice long Tesis if you want to get a chance to read through it. Gimel Mudalef Tesis. What does Pesach Shav mean? That means there are 6 differences between Shmini Atzeres and the rest of Sukkot. Right. The first one is the pious. The Gemara Sukkot tells us that every day they would have many cows and sheep and Sukkot. What they did was, normally you'd have lotteries to give to what we're going to learn in Yoma. But on Sukkot wasn't necessary because there were so many korbanos. What they just did was they took the 24 mishmos, they gave each one an animal, and the next day, and there was usually, and there was more than 24 animals, so then there would be some mishmos get 2 or 3. And the next day, they would give it to the next 24. That means what they did was, it's a very complicated Mishnah in Sukkot, but basically there were so many animals, they would just distribute them all around the mishmos. And that way, everybody would get a few turns on the avodah of Sukkot because there were so many cows and sheep, etc. The exception was Shmini Atzeres. Shmini Atzeres, there wasn't so many animals. There was only 7 sheep and 1 cow and one goat. So therefore, then they went back to the lottery system. So the pay stands for pious, and Shmini Atzeres was a lottery. Zayin is very simple. Zman, Shechionu. You say Shechionu Shmini Atzeres. The Reish is a regular Fleatzmu. It's its own Yom Tov. That's how Rashi explains. Teresa says, but that's exactly the question we're trying to decide. Is it a Yom Tov Yisad? You can't say Reish, it's a Yom Tov Yisad. We're trying to work out it is. So Teresa speaks another Rashi the Sukkah that says you don't sit on the Sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. So therefore that proves it's its own Yom Tov. Okay, we'll get maybe we're on time stays. All right, so that's a regal b'fnei atzma. It means you don't sit in the Sukkah. So we've got pious man regal. Korban, there's kufis korban. The korbanos of sukkahs are different. Again, Tesis asked, it's very similar to the pious. Tesis himself doesn't give a different answer to Maisa. But Tesis says that, it does that you have to get an extra korban after Shmini Atzeres Lina. Right, so we'll leave that for a moment. So korban, you have to bring a separate korban. It's not the same category of sukkahs. Finally, you've got Shin, is a Shiur Latzmut. All the songs of sukkahs all had to do matnos anim, to give presents to anim. Mashe'en came on Shmini Atzeres, it was a different kind of korban, so Tzachal HaShminis. Rashi himself says, I don't know which Shiur they sang on Shmini Atzeres. Look at the last words, Rashi, Shiur. Tesis says, Tzachal HaShminis, which is Perek Yud Beis in Tehillim. And finally, Beis is to make a new bracha. Rashi says to make a special bracha to thank the king of Klal Yisrael. And this was because of the fact that Shlomo Melech finished the Chanukas Abayis on, what's the word for it? On Shmini Atzeres. And again, Tesis discusses that. Okay, I'll just go very briefly what we've learned. Mishnah and Paul, Mishnah and Yoma to say that 7 days before Yom Kippur, 7 days before Aduma, you have to separate the Kohen Gadol for 7 days. Or the Kohen who did it. We learned it from a pasuk, Kasha Tziva Hashem Lasos, I've forgotten it, Lasos Lechapi Aleichem. We said that one Lasos for Aduma Lechapi Yom Kippur. We asked many questions to variety. We still got more. For example, how do we know it's not referring to Shavuos? How do we know it's not referring to other days? The Gemara's answers quite a few. For example, we don't do 7 for 7, we only do 7 for 1. It's not every korban because then you'd never know when it is. There has to be a fixed time, like Shmini Atzeres, for example, Kitzur. And that is a discussion, and the Gemara continues with this discussion. I want to say, it's very, very important. So Yoma, we said, every day that you learn Yoma, you're getting closer and closer to the musik of the control of the Yitzhahor. Shu is to continue, and to continue to learn Yoma and get a clarity and a geschmack in Yoma. Yoma, the day, not D-Day, the day. Tell me, what is the day? What? The day. D-Day means probably the day, no? What's D-Day? What does D stand for in D-Day?
I don't know. Google someone.
No, it probably means the day. They just try to use